Okay. Good evening. So, like I usually say when we're having, a class like this, it's a small number. I mean, it's a bigger number than some of the other classes that I've held, but um, feel free to keep your microphone unmuted and just sort of jump in with a question rather than, waiting for me to call on you. So, whoever would like to go first, go first. And if not, it'll be a short class.
So Bobby asked me this afternoon,
Yeah.
what do I make of President Biden's shift in position to announce that he is not going to provide weaponry to Israel if they attack Rafah? And I gave her my answer, but I wonder if you're waiting for that question so you could give your answer.
Well, I'm not waiting for it, but I anticipated that it would come up. And uh, first of all, with your permission, or even without, a small correction. He did not say he would withhold weapons from Israel if they invaded Rafah. He said he would withhold offensive weapons.
Hmm.
Right? I mean, that, the Iron Dome and other things like that would still continue to flow. Um, and that's important to note and acknowledge, okay? Because he is not saying that he would leave Israel exposed to attacks from Hamas and the Houthis and Hezbollah and whoever, right? So that's an important clarification. Um, Beyond that, look, I have heard a couple of different perspectives. Okay, I'm not gonna, I'm not gonna even address myself to the people who will audit. If Biden says it, it must be wrong. Okay, I'm not going to even address myself to those people. And in fairness, look, under the previous administration, there were plenty of people who, if Trump says it, it must be wrong. So, but I read what Dennis Ross, for example, said today, who is somebody that I know we both respect. And Ross essentially said that Biden was correct to insist that Israel not have a land invasion of Rafah. Biden was correct to insist that Israel allow more aid in, but that it was a mistake to publicly announce that we would withhold offensive weapons because it essentially reduces the incentive of Hamas to reach an agreement. I think there's a lot of wisdom in what Ross said. At the same time, I mean, Netanyahu's position has been, I'm going to do what I want and nobody's going to stop me. And I really was thinking this through, right? And, if Kehilat Shalom were to say to me, you may not use your paycheck for X, Y, and Z things, that would be wrong because that's a paycheck that I've earned and it's mine, right? If somebody were to say to me, like a number of years ago, I mentioned that I was interested in attending the APAC conference, but it was very expensive and I didn't have the money. Okay, so somebody from the shul very generously said, we'll pay for it. They absolutely had a right to say the money we are giving you is for the APAC conference and not, to take your wife out to dinner or, go away to Ocean City for the weekend or whatever. Right. And, I think that we certainly have, legally and morally the right to say to Israel, we are giving you these weapons on condition that you use them for X and not Y. Whether it's wise to say that, I don't know. I mean, I would say that I have heard, or read many Israelis who simultaneously think Israel should not invade Rafah and also think Biden should not have said what he said. Precisely because, well, for two reasons. One is that it does, disincentivize Hamas from coming to an agreement. And two, because, there's a certain fraction of Israeli society that loves nothing more than giving a shtuch to, the goyim. And that, in a sort of paradoxical way, and I'm speaking entirely personally now, right? This could increase the likelihood of an invasion of Rafah, both because of Netanyahu's tendency to, want to give a shtuch, and also because, and here, I absolutely believe, if you had different leadership in Israel, by which I do not necessarily mean less right wing, as I mean less venal, right? In other words, like Begin did a lot of things that I disagreed with, but I never had any doubt that he did what he did because he thought it was best for Israel. Sharon did plenty of things that I disagreed with, but I never had any doubt that he did what he did because he thought it was best for Israel. Netanyahu does plenty of things that I disagree with, and I have no doubt that he does them because he thinks they're best for Netanyahu. And that is the difference. So, the flip side is, if you say, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, and you don't back it up with consequences, then, your statement is meaningless. So and I have to, and I acknowledge that I have, a tendency to be able to see both sides of any particular argument. But I mean, had Dennis Ross not said it, I would have been less inclined to feel or agree with that. Dennis Ross is a smart guy and he knows what he's talking about. So I'll say that I'm leaning towards agreeing with what he said.
Thank you. I had to explain to her whether this was a change in position for Biden from just a few days ago, where he said that there was a pause, but not to worry, it was not a change in policy. And I took a guess that at that point, Biden was sending Netanyahu a message, but just for Netanyahu. It was not a public message. It was publicly done, but in such a way that it didn't raise a whole lot of eyebrows. And meanwhile, he told Netanyahu as clearly as was necessary at the moment what he was thinking. And then something happened, and I don't know what, but in the next several days, he changed it to take the same message he gave Netanyahu, but he chose to make it public.
Right.
And here the question is, what did his intelligence guys tell him that was just about to happen, that he needed to become way bolder than his instincts normally would be? And I don't know what that was, because nobody knows what that was, I don't think.
Right. Although, there was the takeover of the Gaza side of the Rafah border crossing.
Yeah, but
At the time, I mean, both Israel and the United States were saying this isn't the full invasion. It doesn't cross the red line. This is a limited strategic
right.
operation. So, I don't know. Look, I mean, it's also, there's a certain reality on the ground too, okay, that Biden is running for re-election, right? And in order to win, he needs the usual 70-80% of Jewish votes. He also needs Arab American and Muslim American votes, and the votes of young people who see the world very differently than most of us do. So I wouldn't. I'm going to be very honest here. I mean, this is almost what a lawyer would call an admission against interest, right? I mean, because it's no secret to anybody here that I want Biden to win. Is it impossible that he did this for political reasons? No, I think it's very possible that he did this for political reasons. Because he's got to win in November. So there's that possibility as well.
Finding the political reasons that would work domestically. The Arab vote, Trump just declared he's going to reinstate the prohibition from Islamic country people to come to the United States. So I don't think Biden has a whole lot to worry about.
But they could stay home.
They could stay home. And likewise, on the kids' side, I think he came out and spoke, as he did, against hatred and anti-Semitism, and the anger that we're seeing, except for pro-Palestinian kids in those demonstrations, the anger we're seeing is not really against Biden. They may protest because he's the top dog, but it's not against him. It's against the Israeli policy of killing every last Gazan. My opinion.
Yeah, I'm not sure I agree, but I mean, Genocide Joe and all that stuff. All right. Anyway.
So I heard something intriguing on the radio over the weekend. I think it was perhaps the PBS NewsHour, and they were talking about an interview that Hamas had given to Haaretz, which Haaretz reported on. And I'm thinking, that's interesting. Why? They don't recognize the country. Why are they dealing with Israeli media?
Yeah, that's easy. I mean, because they're trying to go over the head of Netanyahu and talk directly to the Israeli populace. I mean,
no, I understand that, but it seems, for a country they don't recognize and who they want to wipe off the earth, why would they talk to one of their,
Well, like I said, because they're trying to go over the head of Netanyahu and talk to the Israeli public. I mean, there are a couple of things there are a couple of data that are relevant. Okay, one, and I, I don't. I mean, again, people here know more, know less. I'm going to venture a guess that I know more about internal Israeli stuff than anybody else in this discussion. I mean, Haaretz is a very left-wing newspaper. Okay, it's not, it's not. I mean, Israeli journalism is more like European journalism. Okay, it's not meant to be neutral. Okay, and Haaretz is a very left-wing paper. Okay, a lot of Israelis. I mean, I suspect if you took a plebiscite in Israel right now, and the question was, should we invade Rafah or not? You might well get a majority of Israelis saying no. Okay, for all kinds of reasons. I mean, including the fact, that however many hostages are still alive, if Israel invades Rafah, and it's hard for me to say Rafah because in Hebrew it's Rafiah, and I mean, I've been there, and if Israel invades Rafiah, the hostages are dead. That's it. As well as the fact that many, many, many Israelis have significant concerns about the conduct of the war, right? I mean, in international law, right, there's two different questions when you look at just war theory, right? Jus ad bellum and jus in bello, right? So, in other words, jus ad bellum means, is it justifiable to wage this war, right? And then jus in bello is the way this war is being waged justifiable? And in my opinion, this is absolutely a just war. It is absolutely a just war. It is not necessarily being waged by just means. That's a different question. And I think many Israelis feel that way. So it makes sense. I mean, assuming that Hamas, right? And this is always the question, right? I mean, if I'm having a negotiation and the party sitting across the table from me thinks it's good for them, oh, maybe it's not so good for me, I mean, right? So, but Hamas desperately wants a ceasefire. They want more than that. They want an end to hostilities. They should have thought about that on October 7th, but that's a different question. Right. So if Hamas can throw fuel on that bonfire of Israeli opposition to an invasion and Israeli support for a ceasefire, no matter what the cost, that's good for them. And the other thing is that, forget Haaretz, okay? I heard an interview with Sinwar on the Israel Broadcasting Authority, okay, in Hebrew. Sinwar speaks fluent Hebrew. Okay, why does Sinwar speak fluent Hebrew? Because he spent 20 years in Israeli jails, right? He speaks fluent Hebrew. I think I mentioned this once before, but I'll mention it again. One of the most bizarre experiences of my life was in 94 or 95, right? When the Oslo agreements were still sort of an active thing, right? I went to Israel. I was on the board of the Education Fund for Israeli Civil Rights and Peace. And we had a board visit to Israel where we met with a lot of Israeli politicians, but we also met with some Palestinian politicians. We went to Gaza when you could still do that. not in a tank, but in a minibus. And we went to the headquarters of the Palestinian Authority in Gaza. This was before Hamas overthrew the PLO. And we had a meeting with the head of the Israel desk of the Palestine Authority, who did not speak English, but was fluent in Hebrew. Again, because he spent years in Israeli jails. Okay, so I am sitting in the PLO headquarters in Gaza, translating the Hebrew spoken by a high PLO official into English for a bunch of American Jews. Okay, right? I mean, it's kind of, but these are two populations that are very, very, very much intertwined, okay? Which, gets to why many people think the two-state solution is dead, because they're so intertwined that you can't disentangle them. But Sinwar speaks fluent Hebrew, and he has no problem giving interviews to Israeli radio in Hebrew. I mean, if it'll help him get what he wants, then why not?
Yeah, no, I get all that. It just seems like, hypocrisy and, it almost, but again, almost like an implicit recognition, that
there's a different, they recognize the fact of Israel, right? They can't not recognize the fact of Israel, right?
Right.
They don't recognize the justice of the existence of Israel, but they certainly recognize the fact of Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah. What else? Yeah, Toby.
Does this rise in do you think this rise in anti-Semitism has any effect on the approach that the very Orthodox take toward their reasoning for the fact that we had the Holocaust? Or is this just the continuation because the Messiah hasn't come yet?
All right. I mean, I think that's a great question. I mean, I think that, it's important to avoid painting any group with a broad brush. Okay. So, even within the ultra-Orthodox or Haredi community, right, there are different perspectives, right? I mean, there is the perspective of, the Neturei Karta and people of that ilk who are, extreme anti-Zionists who show up at, pro-Palestine protests, waving Palestinian flags and saying, and signs that say Judaism and Zionism are diametrically opposed. Authentic Jews denounce Israel and Zionism, et cetera, right? And for them, like the Satmar Rebbe said that the Holocaust was justified punishment of the Jews for all of their straying from authentic Jewish teaching, right? So it's the fault of the Zionists, it was the fault of the Reform, it was the fault of the conservative, it was the fault of the modern Orthodox, it was the fault of everybody except the ultra-Orthodox, right? That's a fringe belief, I think, within contemporary ultra-Orthodoxy who are pro-Israel but not Zionist, okay? But there is certainly this, there's a statement in the Gemara, Halacha Esav Soneh et Yaakov, okay? it is a law, it is the halacha that Esau hates Jacob. Okay, so for them, anti-Semitism is simply endemic, right? And there is nothing that the Jews can do to prevent it because it's not caused by Jews. And by the way, I do not agree that all Gentiles hate the Jews, but I do agree that anti-Semitism is not a problem of Jews, it's a problem of non-Jews. Right? And there's nothing that we did to cause it, and there's nothing that we did that we can do to lessen it. I'm sure that for many others, it may cause them to reevaluate their view towards Zionism because they may conclude that, that Israel is needed as a potential refuge, right? I mean, it's interesting. I mean, one of the more interesting people on these questions is a guy that most of you have probably never heard of by the name of Josh Marshall, who is the editor of Talking Points Memo. He had an interesting article on the college protests within the last few days, where he said that and Talking Points Memo is a left-wing publication. All right, he is absolutely against the way that Israel has been conducting this war. But he says at the same time, he's been spending more and more time defending Israel's existence, right? And that these college protests in a kind of paradox, which are aimed, and I absolutely believe many of them are aimed not at Israel's conduct, but at Israel's very existence, right? And the more that these protests are aimed at Israel's very existence, and and Hillels get vandalized, and for example, at UCLA, one of the demands was to eliminate the Center for Israel Studies, okay, which is not funded by Israel, does not propagandize for Israel. It is an academic center for the study of Israel. It pushes Jewish college students to understand more why Israel as a refuge is in fact necessary. So I also look, college students can be simultaneously very bright and very stupid. That's literally what the word sophomore means, right? Wise fool. And and this was a while ago, but I remember discussing this, right? That a UCLA professor paid for out of his own pocket, for pollsters to ascertain what percentage of college students who support the slogan "From the river to the sea, Palestine will be free" could actually identify the river and the sea. Okay, and it was less than 50%. So there is a certain sense in which this is the cause du jour. I mean, there's also no situation, because I started my career as a Hillel rabbi, right? And I will tell you, and I'm seeing this from people in Hillel right now, that there is no campus situation that cannot be made worse by external organizations like the ADL and the American Jewish Committee and the JCRC showing up. And making, like what happened at UCLA. I mean, on the last day of Pesach, I mean, and like this is like, between us, right? So on Tuesday, last Tuesday, a bunch of counter protesters showed up with bats and sticks and stuff like that, and proceeded for several hours to beat the crap out of the pro-Palestinian encampment people. And there was a part of me that very much enjoyed seeing this. Okay. And then there was, like, that was my lizard brain, right? And my seichel brain said this is, both morally wrong and, like just strategically wrong, right? But to this now, and it's complicated, right? Because why were they able to beat the crap out of these people for hours without police interference? Because the encampment people had insisted that the police not be allowed on campus. So they had insisted that the police not be allowed on campus, so they weren't on campus to save them from these counter protesters, right? Nobody knows who these people were. I mean, a lot of them spoke Hebrew, and there are a lot of Israelis in LA. They seem to be older than college students. The college students who observed this said, we didn't recognize any of them. They were probably not students. But there is no situation that cannot be made worse by outside people. And, it should be left, I mean, if the college says to the police, come and arrest these people, that's one thing. But I'm not sure that, these press conferences, and I mean, all the more so these hearings going on Capitol Hill, which is just, for political show, I think they, make the situation worse, in my opinion. No? All right. So speak now or forever hold your peace. All right. Then Laila Tov, Chodesh Tov, Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Bye-bye.
Lila Tove. Thank you.
Yeah. You're welcome.
See you.